Nearly 10 years into this business, we had the opportunity to make our absolute dream food. Being a private, independently funded company, this is a huge deal for us, and we are so excited with what we're able to come up with and what we're able to share with you. Having had two super sensitive dogs, trying to shop for them was the absolute hardest thing. They couldn't have so many things, and we were able to come up with a food that fit what I was always looking for. Some main things I was looking for was no fish oil, because they couldn't have fish oil, no synthetic ingredients, and super short ingredient panels, so that I could narrow down what was working and what wasn't. And that's exactly what we came up with.
So a lot of people have questions about how you formulate a complete and balanced diet. And what a lot of people don't know is that there are methods for formulating that diet, and that none of those methods are 100% correct or certain. And so we actually do something very unique. We start with using formulation software that averages USDA data, so we can get a better understanding of the nutrients in the food. And then we compare that to raw data nutrient tests. So that's one way we can bring two sources of information together to understand that this is a reasonably complete and balanced diet. But then we also completed a feeding trial on our food as well, which gives us a whole different set of data, which means that dogs were eating this food and this food alone for 6 months, and that trial that we did is an AAFCO compliant feeding trial. So now we can take our feeding trial data and combine that with our feeding calculator data and our raw data and get an even better expectation that this is a complete and balanced food and has everything your dog or cat needs, which is another thing that's very unique about our food, is that this is complete and balanced for both dogs and cats. So now if you have a multi-animal household, you can feed them both the same thing and simplify how you feed the food. So at Green Juju, we have a veterinary program that has over 100 veterinarians, and every one of those veterinarians has officially endorsed this food. And so these are vets that are recommending it at their practice, they're using it for their clients, and have had really good results with that. So you can take that assurance that over 100 veterinarians have officially endorsed this food. These recipes are the most efficient and limited recipes on the market. Each one of them is 3 ingredients from an allergy perspective, with the exception of our rabbit with duck liver, which is 4. And the ingredient panel is incredibly short. For instance, our beef is beef heart, beef liver, beef bone, organic kale, and organic kelp, and that is the entire ingredient panel. So we are able to achieve this because we eliminated or used as little muscle meat as possible, and we replaced that with heart. Heart is much more nutrient dense and has a better vitamin and mineral profile. And then we use more kidney and liver than basically anything that's on the market. This allows us to get 99% of the vitamins from the heart, kidney, and liver that we're using, and for those vitamins to be in their most bioavailable form. A great example of this is some foods might be formulated with, say, a lot of squash, and that would actually be beta carotene, which is your dog or cat's body would have to convert into vitamin A. But all the vitamin A in this is called retinol vitamin A, which is a usable fat-soluble form. So all the vitamins in that same way are the most bioavailable form. So if you have a sensitive dog or cat, you can put them on this food knowing that they're good with those 3 ingredients. And if they have to stay there, then you've found something that works for them. But if you want to experiment and have them work with other things in our line, you can introduce those things one by one over time to add variety.
How are we able to not use fish oil?
So there are a lot of animals that are sensitive to fish oil, and also we just prefer to do things in whole food form. When you're sourcing your meat, if you're using a source that isn't grass-fed or eating an appropriate diet or isn't on pasture or outside, it's going to drive their omega-6 ratio way up and their omega-3 ratio way down. And so something that we talked about was what matters is the ratio of omega-3 to 6. And so what happens is if you're using meat of that quality, what you can do is you can add fish oil to artificially inflate that ratio so you get back in. But what we do is we just take what nature provides and provide that ratio without having to do fish oil. And another reason we don't typically do fish oil is there's many good fish oils, but there's also many overly processed and not healthy fish oils. And so we would rather avoid processed foods in general and move straight into just the actual food itself.
So there's this principle in nutrition called like feeds like. Can you tell us about it and how it applies to our food?
Yes, so essentially your dog's, and a good example of this would be your dog's heart is made of the same nutrient profile as a cow's heart. And so when you feed a lot of heart, you're gonna get a lot of those nutrients. A great example of that is there's a nutrient called CoQ10, which is very good for your heart. And within our beef, if you feed a 50-pound or a 30-pound dog our beef formula, they are gonna get a 50 milligram dose of CoQ10, which is a high supplemental dose. And you can extrapolate that out through all of the nutrients for the heart. Or for example, this would also just be kidney and liver. So if you have a dog that has liver issues, this is a great way to support the liver or the kidney. And even if you don't have an animal that has an issue with those things, you're always looking to preserve those organs in the future when they become an older or senior animal. So feeding something that's high in heart, liver, and kidney can be very beneficial long-term for that reason as well.
Some people have concerns about high organ meat and they wonder if that might cause digestive upset or if that's okay to feed on a regular basis. What do you have to say to that?
So I understand that concern. However, a lot of the organ in our formula is actually heart, which is a muscle-like organ, so it's more similar to muscle meat, but just has a much more nutrient-dense profile. And as a result of that, since this food has been on the market, we've had really great results in terms of not only digestion, but also in health outcomes. And having completed our feeding trial, we had amazing results in terms of the health and vitality of those dogs and the blood work as well. And so this is a great option for really any dog and cat. So all of our foods, I find that the thing that makes it hardest for dogs and cats to transition is when they're moving around to different fat to protein ratios. So if they're going on this food and it's much higher fat versus this food that's much higher protein. So all of our foods are designed a specific way and they go off of the natural fat ratios of the organs themselves. So outside of our lamb formula, which is naturally higher in fat, which is more of a ketogenic ratio, all of the other ones are a 1-to-1 fat to protein ratio by calories, meaning you're gonna get the same amount of calories from fat as you are from protein. And the really cool thing about that is this comes from, not only if you look at wolf species, you can find that when wolves pick their own diet in the wild, that is the ratio that they generally select. And even when you look at dog self-selection studies, you get the same ratio over time. It's actually kind of interesting because dogs will choose a higher fat diet in the beginning when they don't know where their food is coming from or if they're going to get their next meal. They prioritize calories, but over time they revert to that 1-to-1 ratio. So it kind of works in both ways. The first one is it's the same fat to protein ratio, so you don't really have to transition between them. And the second one is it's easy to feed because it'll be basically the same amount for every protein. So you don't really have to look at the bag and go, how much of this do I feed versus this? It'll be basically the same amount for all of those outside of lamb, which is great for an animal that may have just got a cancer diagnosis or just runs off of a high-fat diet better, maybe a really, really big dog or something like that. And it just depends on what works for your animal. But we have the range, which is nice as well.
The quality and the way that we source the protein for our food is very important to us because it translates into the nutrients that we're feeding our pets. So do you want to talk about where we source all of our proteins?
Yes, our beef is grass-fed and it's from Washington. Our bison is grass-fed and it's from Colorado and Wyoming. Our pork is pastured, it's from Oregon. Our rabbit is non-GMO and free-ranging from Spain. And I say non-GMO because it's actually really hard to find free-ranging rabbits and ones that are specifically non-GMO. And our ducks come from California, and they're actually free-ranging and outside. And our lamb and our goat come from Australia. And our goat specifically is very interesting because it is wild harvested goat, which actually leads to our lowest omega-3 ratio, which is a 2-to-1 ratio. The only way you can make a food that has the appropriate omega-3 to 6 ratio is by using well-sourced meat. And this is another really cool thing about the food, is that you can know that these animals were actually raised in a good environment and fed the right things because of those inherent ratios. So we're one of the few, if not the only, pet food company that's actually doing a full fatty acid panel test. So we know what the omega-3 to 6 ratio is in the meats that we have. A great example of that is our beef is going to be a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 omega-3 to 6 ratio. That ratio comes inherently from grass-fed animals.
When it comes to raw food, we take our food safety very seriously. Walk me through that.
It starts with very clean sourcing. We have free-range animals that are grass-fed, they're eating appropriate diets, that aren't in confinement, and that reduces pathogen load. That goes to the facility where we have only human-grade edible ingredients, where they're doing spot checks for pathogens in the actual processing of the product. Once the product itself is processed, we use something called high-pressure processing, which is essentially applying pressure to the food that deactivates pathogens like Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria. And beyond that, we even do test and hold, which means that we actually test the product for those pathogens and only send it out if it tests negative for those pathogens. A lot of people think that companies that use high pressure processing use that to make up for lazy manufacturing. But our process from the farm all the way through the facility is top notch. And then we go the extra step to make sure that the food is safe.
HPP can be a controversial topic in our industry. How did we come to believing that this is the best way to move forward with our food, and what have we learned in this process?
Well, we took an honest scientific journey into how high pressure processing affects the nutrients of the food. And I personally did a full 180 on this topic in taking that honest scientific journey. And we went to many standards of information, from PhDs who work in the technology to different conferences, and we came to a pretty firm conclusion, and that is, what is raw food? And raw food has its enzymes active, has its background bacteria, that they remain alive, that the digestibility is the same, and that the nutrient content is the same, and that we're not applying heat to the product. And we came to the conclusion, based on the evidence, that high pressure processed food is raw food. And once you can reach that conclusion, then you know that you can use it as a tool to make the food safer in the end, and still get that raw product. The thing that's the most important to you, the end user, or someone who's selling to the end user, is we would have been fine not making a food if we determined that this process was invasive and produced something that wasn't raw. But we were very comfortable in that process, and we can use that process to make the best food on the market even that much more safe.
In our frozen, we have a 3-pound bag of 48 1-ounce sliders. This is great for smaller dogs or cats. We have a 6-pound bag of 8-ounce patties, and this is great for dogs like up to 60, 70 pounds maybe. We have an 18-pound bulk box, which is great for multiple animals or larger dogs. We also have our freeze-dried and 14-ounce bags. We have all the same proteins across freeze-dried and frozen, except for we also have bison and freeze-dried. If you are somebody who's been feeding kibble, or somebody coming into the store who's used to feeding kibble, this is going to be a great option to transition to, because it's very similar to how you feed kibble.
So with our frozen products, all you need to do is thaw out however much you're going to use for either a day or 2 or 3 days, and keep that in the fridge, and then just simply put it in the bowl and serve. For our freeze-dried, we're going to recommend that you rehydrate that product. And it's a really simple ratio. However much food you put into the bowl, you just want to do at least the same amount of liquid. And that could be water, or that could be our raw goat's milk, or that could be bone broth. I highly recommend letting that absorb. You don't need to do that, but I find the best practice for feeding our freeze-dried food is when you feed breakfast, rehydrate for dinner and just stick it in the fridge. And by the time you feed dinner, it'll all be soaked in. And then when you feed dinner, you can rehydrate for breakfast. But if you're in a pinch, you can also just add the moisture and let them eat it that way too.
This food is great for sensitive dogs who just need a few ingredients, or if you're doing kind of like an elimination diet with a dog and trying to figure out what they can or can't tolerate. Since there's so little, it's very easy to eliminate. However, if you have a dog who isn't limited and can do a lot more, this is a great base that you could then add other things to. So you could add our blends and like rotate through them. You could add goat's milk or bone broth or our paste or any other product that you want. And this is just a great base to start with.
One really nice thing about this line is you can kind of rotate through these and get the different nutritional benefits of all the different protein types. Food is the most important thing you feed to your dog or cat. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us over Instagram or email, and Kelly and I are happy to answer your questions.